almost no one who works in or with the social sector in India needs reminding of the constant struggle to attract, nurture, and retain the increasingly complex skill sets and motivations that we so urgently need. The challenge seems to span all kinds of organizations. So whether it's well-known and well-remunerating consultants and international foundations, or think tanks, or research organizations, or campaigning and advocacy groups, or grassroots NGOs, this seems to be, after the challenge of fundraising, seems to be the second biggest issue that leaders are confronting. CSIP and ISDM have been working on a research study in this area. And when we first started to tackle the issue, we were not surprised to find that neither job roles nor types of organizations were particularly well defined. And as the sector has grown in size, in scale, in complexity, the supply of relevant talent has simply not kept pace. Even before we start to address the opportunities that our keynote speaker outlined today of developing entirely new paradigms of development, even if we were to focus on the much narrower goal of saying, how are we going to close the gaps to the SDGs that have been so severely exacerbated by the pandemic, it's clear that we don't have the pipeline of talent or the supply of talent that the sector needs. All of the panelists today have played critical roles in developing the ecosystem for talent and have very, very hands-on first-hand experience of these issues. Their CVs, if I was to list all of their accomplishments, it would take us the better part of this evening. So I've asked the team at ISDM to post them in the chat. I'll just focus on some key highlights. Let me start with Amit. Amit is the chairperson and a member of the Asia Pacific leadership team of Bain Capital Private Equity, where he came after a stellar career at DSP Merrill Lynch. He serves on multiple boards, and he and his wife Archana pursue their passion and commitment for social change through their philanthropic initiative. The A.T. Chandra Foundation. They were also Dr. Pramath Raj Sinha is so multifaceted. He defies description. So he's an entrepreneur, an institution builder, an academic, an executive, and a philanthropist. And among other credits, was the founding dean of the Indian School of Business, one of the founders of Harappa Education, the 9.9 Group, Ashoka University, Vedika Scholars Program for Women, and the Naropa Fellowship. Shaheen Mistry is the CEO for Teach for India and one of its founding board members. She's also the founder of the Akanksha Foundation, which over the past 25 years has grown from serving 15 children in one center to almost 4,500 children in 51 centers and 16 schools in Mumbai and Pune. Teach for India, which was founded in 2008, has recruited, trained, and placed fellows in schools across 7 cities in India and is today a 3,400 plus strong member community impacting over 1 million children directly and probably reaching over 30 million children indirectly. She's also an Ashoka Fellow, a global leader for tomorrow at the World Economic Forum, and an Asia Society 21 leader. I'm going to start with you, Shaheen. The organizations that you founded and led have each helped to attract, to nurture individuals as fellows, as employees, as volunteers, who've then gone on to serve the sector in multiple ways, including founding their own organizations. What, in your experience, are the key barriers to attracting, growing, retaining talent in our sector? And how have you overcome some of these challenges?
Thanks, Ingrid. It's so good to be here. And good timing, because we're trying to recruit 600 new fellows and our recruitment deadline is around the corner. So this is a topic very close to my heart. I think, to your question, one thing I've learned is that it just is very important to understand and deepen our own understanding of young people and what they want from organizations. And a few thoughts come to mind, which then translate into barriers that we've tried to address. I think the young person today really wants to have impact, social impact, but at the same time, the young person today sees work as one aspect of their life. So figuring out wholeness in a young person's life. I think compensation is important. At the same time, constant learning seems really important to young people today, perhaps even over loyalty and depth, the ability to do things that are new, to learn. I think culture is increasingly important to young people coming into the workplace. Diversity, equity, the ability to raise my voice, the autonomy I get. So lots of changes in the demands of people coming into the workplace. A few things I would say are key barriers, and this is really speaking from our own experience. One is that the work is just challenging. And I think when you go to the closer you get to the ground in some ways, the more difficult it is, the work, not just skill set wise, but emotion wise. And I think being authentic about that when you bring people in, knowing that it's not just about recruiting people, but also making sure they perform and also making sure they stay. I think we've tried to just be really authentic. So our recruitment campaigns are you ready for a challenge? Come into a classroom, talk to a fellow, understand what it means to be on the ground, but not shying away from the challenge. At the same time, the other side of it is, can you therefore, because it's so challenging, to create a culture within the organization that allows for the development of the whole employee and the whole person. And we've tried to do a bunch of different things, loosely called our Caring for People initiative, from sabbaticals to downtime off, to encouraging weekends and leave off, to counseling support for people that are working especially close to the ground, to, of course, a big focus on hiring strong managers, because I think that makes or breaks your experience, especially as a young person coming in. The second barrier is still compensation. We're today paying at about the 75th percentile of the nonprofit sector, but it's still a massive cut from corporate sector, and we require a lot of corporate sector skills. So I think there again, what we've tried to do to the best of our ability is constant benchmarking with the sector, building a case with our board and others of the need to pay people well, and just trying to the best of our ability to justify higher compensation. The third that I would point out is the ability to see impact. I think in the social sector, it's really hard. Like often you plant seeds and the impact will be seen, perhaps never by you. And so how do you help people really set goals, break things down into milestones, understand the role of faith in the work as well as measurable impact, learn how to see qualitative impact as well as quantitative impact. So I think that speaks to having a strong performance management system and really working with people to be able to see the progress they're making and celebrate the small steps. And finally, to the barrier or the need for voice, for culture, I think just making a really strong investment. I spend a lot of my time personally thinking about how do values not stay on the wall, but how do they break down into actions? How does that get reflected into everything from how we hire and the questions we ask to how we look, what we look at during the performance management appraisal system, lots of spaces for open voice, lots of anonymous surveys to really get people to express in different ways what they really believe and want from their workplace. So I'll stop there, Ingrid. It was a big question, but hopefully that gave light to some of the challenges and what we're doing.
And if I can sort of just list some of them. So you're saying, going back in reverse order, really strong listening mechanisms, aligning your internal systems with the needs of this generation, authenticity across what you're doing, actively building that culture that promotes engagement, agency, and learning. And of course, then addressing the remuneration problem as to the extent possible. I'm going to come back to you, but Pramad, if I can turn to you for a minute. You've helped many ventures get off the ground, and many of those ventures are focused on actually generating a pipeline of talent, not just that's going to work immediately in the social sector, but to speak to Chris's point earlier, which is socially aware human beings, regardless of what sector they eventually deploy their talents in. What are you seeing as what needs to change if we're actually going to encourage and prepare more young Indians for these careers of purpose?
Thank you, Ingrid. I think a lot of the points that Shaheen has made are probably relevant to what I have to say as well. I'll just perhaps approach it from the perspective you're, I think, nudging me to, which is what needs to change in the way we educate and guide youngsters. And, I'm reminded of the time I studied in Patna, which is a relatively small place, even in those days. But I was in a school where they used to teach us, the Jesuits used to teach us moral science, right? And I think their intent was to use that to make us good human beings. I don't know how well that worked, but it was almost like, the reason I'm bringing that up is you almost need to make development part of mainstream education. So people understand that if you are actually in school and a decent enough school, and Shaheen will bear me out, you almost have a responsibility. You are just too privileged already. There's nothing to do with your socio-economic background. It's just the virtue of the fact that you're getting a good education. You have to use that education to solve some of the larger problems in the world. And I think that DNA we have to kind of program, I'm sorry, using a perhaps not such an acceptable word, but you have to literally put that into kids' minds and throughout our education system at all levels. Now, that's very nice to say as a principle, and I'm sure others have said that. How do you actually do it? And in my mind, to my mind, there are 2 or 3 things that at least I have seen work at the higher ed level, which is where I've been involved. In fact, most of my programs have been at the post-grad level. So, if you can even fix it there, I feel, if you go further back, you can actually make a transformational change. There, what I've found is what people are looking for is really 2 things. They're looking for challenge. Everybody fancies that they are smart and they are a good problem solver and, want to engage, at least most young people want to engage on tough problems and be able to seem to be solving them and exercising their brains, at least in their 20s and 30s. But of late, I've also noticed that people want more than that. They want growth. They want to work in places where they will learn, develop, expand their capacities, capabilities. And the last and the third thing, which is a new phenomenon I'm seeing, and when Amit and I were growing up, we were told to just go out and succeed. And we kind of took what came our way and grabbed it and held on to it. I think now people are asking very fundamental questions about meaning and purpose, right? And it's actually quite stark for me because, I don't think I asked about meaning and purpose till I was in my late 30s. And it wasn't that I came from a privileged background or anything, but all I was focused on was career, success, and money and wealth and so on. So I think you have to somewhere answer these 3 questions in the context of the kind of work and the kind of leadership we are talking about. And so again, the challenge, and I think we have enough in good measure to satisfy these requirements. We just need to connect the dots for people, right? that listen, if you are in college, if you're so smart and if you're worth the salt you claim you are, then you should be solving some of the toughest problems, and these are some of the toughest problems in the world, and if you don't work on it, who will, right? So driving that sense into people. Second, getting people to understand, and this is where building organizations like the one Shaheen is building is, hey, if you go there, you will grow as much as you would if you went to Bain, right? And develop and grow. And I think that's very important. So we need the organizations, and that's why you need development management as a discipline that focuses on people's growth and so on. And finally, that listen, we'll help you find purpose and meaning. Purpose and meaning doesn't grow on trees. So ultimately, you have to go discover it for yourself. And it's these kinds of organizations can help you get there. So I would say that that's what, in some measure, we've tried to do in the programs. I don't want to get into the how of it, but I think that's, to me, the essence of how you build that DNA from day one. And what my experience comes from higher ed, but you could actually translate that right to the junior levels. I hope that answers your question to some extent.
To some extent. I'm going to turn to Amit because I noticed that we have about 10 minutes left. So Amit, you bring a somewhat unique perspective to this discussion because you're one of the few philanthropists that actually has made investing in capacity building and institution building a priority in your philanthropy. What have you learned that you think other funders should be paying attention to, and how, if at all, has COVID changed the point of view among philanthropists?
Thank you, Ingrid. Let me try to actually build a little bit, starting off on what Chris was trying to actually articulate. It's actually quite remarkable what the Indian IT industry has been able to do for the country. But I don't think much of that would have been possible if it wasn't for the immense body of talent that existed in the country. Now, much of that body of talent, Ingrid, was actually untrained, and it was the huge amount of training schools that got set up in the country, the Apples and the NIITs of the world, who helped large number of companies like the Infosys and the TCSs and the Wipros of the world. And then, of course, these companies were able to actually set up in-house, training programs of immense scale to actually shape some of this talent and then build remarkable global leading companies. Now, why is all of this important to the social sector? We have remarkable aspirations for the social sector. I don't think anyone will deny that social sector problems are far more difficult to solve than any business problem. But who's actually training and equipping these social sector leaders and the next in line people the way we have actually trained corporate leaders and the next in line for solving these problems? And this is a question that, Archana and I asked ourselves when we started actually thinking about this issue in a sort of systemic way. We obviously had not much of money, when we started thinking about this. And so we thought very hard about, should we actually start, going to the point Shaheen was making, just compensating people a lot more in the organizations that we were involved with. But we realized we could only lift a few boats with that. So we decided that instead of doing that, we'll actually start investing in building training programs. We started with one, we realized it actually worked. We started, supporting two, and over time, we've now, support 12 training programs. I think somewhere around 3,500 to 4,000 leaders have gone through these training programs, over a 10 or 15 year journey. We've set up new goals for ourselves. This year, the first training program in vernacular got established via Common Purpose. We have a goal that by 2030, at least 10,000 leaders should be trained in these training programs. Unless we have a social sector which is really equipped with leaders who are well equipped with the tools that corporate leaders and their next in line, have, I don't think we have the right to ask, not-for-profit organizations, are you really performing at an optimal level? So I think we have to basically really invest in the capacity, and that's one lens by which we are doing it. There are other lenses that we are doing it as well. You talked about institution building. Again, in the corporate world, we've realized that miraculously things happen. There are banks who provide funding. There are knowledge institutions that provide knowledge. There are law firms that provide legal advice. And so we decided, over a decade ago that whatever gaps we find, we will basically start, investing in building those gaps, which is why we got together with Gates and Omidyar and started building Give India as a digital platform. We got together with Ashish and started building CSIP as a convening and research platform. We got together with other like-minded people and started building IDR, including CSIP as the main partner. I think it's very important to take this systemic approach and to build important gaps, particularly when you don't have much of resources. But I think it's important that other funders take this approach. And I think it's very important in my mind that the not-for-profit leaders as well awaken their supporters to do the same thing and get investments for investing in the capacity of their own organizations. Because often what happens is they ask for a lot of investment in programs, but it's investments in non-program expenses that our realization has been helps organizations really grow and prosper. And so, at this point of time, we are trying to really, make a lot of investments in awakening both funder as well as not-for-profit networks to get them to realize that this is really, really critical.
So there's a lot of messages in the chat resonating with the idea that we need to, sort of start young, get people engaged at school level, have volunteering programs, including compulsory volunteering, whatever that means. It's like compulsory philanthropy. I can certainly confirm that one of the things we found at CRY when we looked specifically at corporate crossovers, the MSWs were the MSWs. They had chosen this track early. But when we looked at people who migrated from the private sector and we tried to find anything that they had in common, because they came from so many different skill sets and industries. One thing that ran across all of them was they'd had a deeply immersive volunteering experience when they were in high school or college. So investments there, I can speak from experience, do pay off. There's a question, I think, around, and this was from R. Prakash, which is, how do we even let people know of the spectrum of needs that the nonprofit sector is seeking? So I'm a lawyer, I'm an accountant, I'm a techie, I'm whatever, an HR person. How do I think for most people, their perceptions of the sector are still driven by, I don't know, Mother Teresa and Baba Amte or something, which is you've got to be this self-sacrificing, noble person to join the sector, as opposed to the reality, which is we need data science people and lawyers and finance experts. And so how are we going to bridge that perception gap between how the sector is perceived and then letting people know that there are actually opportunities for their talents? Anyone, whichever of you wants to speak to that. Pramath, I'm going to pick on you.
Yeah, I was thinking, I don't know if I have an answer. At least I have assumed that people who are interested are able to find such opportunities. It's more a question of how do you trigger that interest? If that's what the question is, I think if you've not been able to do that through the education system, then that's kind of a missed opportunity. And that's why we are trying to create some of these programs and so on. So I don't know if there's a silver bullet to solve that problem that I can think of, unless you create some sort of and I think Shaheen mentioned it on the chat, you sort of create a national mission around development leadership or social change leadership, or almost have a conscription program. I'm building a university in Nigeria, and I didn't realize that after graduation, people have to go and work in a non-profit job as a requirement. Like in Israel or Singapore, you have to go to join the army. Here, you actually have to go and work in a non-profit or a government department. In Nigeria, every young person has to do that. So maybe that's the silver bullet or hard answer. But yeah, I think I don't have any other particularly good ideas. I don't know if Amit or Shaheen would like to add to that.
Or even more generally, Amit, Shaheen, is there a game-changing idea that would specifically help us to widen and deepen this talent pool that we're seeking?
Shaheen, you want to go? I have a thought, maybe.
Go ahead.
I have rarely found someone who really wants to work in the sector not find a home. I mean, most of my work is with farmers, and you find me a person who wants to do satellite engineering, and they can do geomapping. I can use scientists for a lot of the work we do in agri-science. Data engineers we need all the time. M&E is a core of a lot of the work we do. Field work is, of course, absolutely paramount. So if people want to do field work, I mean, that's something I personally love doing. So I don't think there is if a person is passionate about, wanting to do work, it's very difficult to not find a place. And I can tell you, if someone has ever reached out to me and I realize that they really want to do work in something that we don't do, we have always connected them to an organization that, we think will be good for them. So I've rarely found something where someone not finding an opportunity. And I know someone who I look up to a lot is right now working on a path-breaking idea where they're going to create a volunteer portal which will connect things in a more efficient manner. So
we've got a Peace Corps equivalent from Pramath, or that sort of model, and then there's the sort of platform type idea from Amit. Anything you want to add to that, Shaheen? Or do you want to endorse one or more?
I mean, I'm going to endorse the Peace Corps idea. I think as someone, Ingrid, probably what you were saying, I started volunteering when I was 12 years old. I think it fundamentally shifted my life. And I think if math and language can be compulsory, why can't service be compulsory as a part of what you experience growing up in school? But I also think on the other side that, like Amit's point on capacity building, like specifically for NGOs to learn also how to tell the story of what they do, it's really hard. Like, I've been doing this work for 30 years. I still struggle to actually communicate clearly and crisply like what Teach for India does and what we actually need. And it does feel like there's the need to build capacity on that side as well.
Thanks, Shaheen. I'm going to just quickly take a look at some of the questions that have come in. One of them relates to funding, which is, do you think that in light of sort of the current crunch on funds, that you're actually going to be able to pay what you need to acquire the talent that we need? from RT Madhusudan, do you believe that we could inspire more people to participate if we demonstrate that it's good for them in some way? So just feel free to pick any of these questions and go for it. Why is it that, from Sajid, why is it that despite recognizing leadership transitions to be one of the most important aspects of talent management, organizations continue to struggle and most often fail at it? Just any of those questions that catches your fancy.
I think leadership transitions generally fail because board members don't ask leaders tough questions, and leaders are often very insecure about letting go. And I think that those are and as a consequence of that, leaders often don't groom the next in line, and that those three things are like a triangle, which is a very vicious triangle that becomes difficult to get out of, and the cause lands up actually suffering. And I've seen this in many organizations. Often organizations are really lucky that if they lose a CEO in sometimes in terrible circumstances, either CEO passes away or sometimes the CEO leaves in some odd circumstances, that the organization lands on its feet. But it's really unfortunate that in many organizations just like wither away because multiple of these three things don't get addressed in time.
Anyone else? From you look like you have something to say.
No, one of my friends in the audience messaged me separately, and she makes a very interesting point to the earlier discussion, that she finds that in the corporate world, and this is Shalini Kapoor, she's mentioning that she's found in the corporate world that sometimes you can use the fact that people have a certain apathy to the regular work that they're doing and use that as a trigger to motivate people. I thought that was an interesting thought. But you have to have empowered managers or enlightened managers who encourage people to do that, especially when they are in jobs that might not in the short term give them the same purpose and meaning. It goes back to that point.
I know I've seen at Bain Consulting, for example, in the US, it's actually a reward. So it's only the top 1% of performers that are permitted the opportunity to volunteer with Habitat for Humanity. So it becomes a performance incentive that you will get to do this on company time if you're in the top 1%, which is a complete switch around to, if you're burned out and bored, then you need to look at the social sector. Let me just check these questions again. There's one.
Ingrid, I just wanted to, I think someone had a question on funding.
Yes.
Yeah. I just wanted to address that question. I know that's an important question that resonates on a lot of people's mind, and fundraising has been a big issue. One of the things that I think, people don't invest in is actually fundraising capacity. And I think it's really, really important to invest in fundraising capacity. And often that frees up the CEO's time. A huge amount of time we've realized of the CEO gets taken up in fundraising, and CEO is often, clearly the most, competent person who holds, the purpose of the organization together. You take away her time, and a lot of the operations land up suffering, and many of the donors want to see her all the time. But you need to really bring in that person who's capable of telling the story and managing donor affairs. Pramath and I had the same issue for Ashoka as well, but we brought in an extraordinarily talented person who now runs with fundraising, and I think this is true. We've done this in many cases with organizations that Archana and I support as well, and we now have a documented toolkit on what it takes. It's different for different companies, organizations, but I think there is something which I think organizations need to do, which, it may not work every time, but you may fail, but you need to try again, where you invest in a high quality fundraising person. When you do that, actually it pays for itself many, many times over.
Moving the norms in philanthropy. I mean, what you guys are doing as part of Grow Fund, for example.
Yes,
absolutely. Where you're saying philanthropy itself needs to revisit its priorities and say, if you're going to expect impact, then you're going to have to invest in capacity.
Absolutely. I mean, the Grow Fund is an example, and hopefully there'll be a lot of case studies which will emanate from the 100 organizations that we're supporting out of that fund. But even with the organizations, 40 or so organizations we have supported outside of that, there are lots of case studies. We have with Satwa published, for example, the matching grant, case study toolkit. There's so many examples of how you can actually maximize, just fundraising capability and capacity. And I think it's important for organizations to learn from that. Everyone kind of tries to reinvent the wheel.
One last question before I say thank you to all of you, which is, do you see technology playing any particular role in addressing the talent gap or enhancing capacities in the sector?
And of course, it has to. I think we almost have to use technology as people are using it in other fields to actually bridge the gap, to build flyovers and to leapfrog. Because I do think I'm converted and I feel like, of course, you don't have to be over exuberant about and over optimistic about technology, but I think being able to work remotely and being able to build capacity online and so on, and of course do it in a hybrid and blended model is the most powerful way to do it. It's been proven in other places and we should definitely leverage it here.
Thank you, Prama. I'm going to thank all three of you.